Okay. Good. Perfect. So thank you, Mary. Thank you, everybody. And Christine, I know you were very instrumental in this, this masterclass I'm going to do today on desire interrupted. And I'm going to now go ahead and share my screen so that you can see my slides. Mary, can you see that okay?
Yes, I can see it fine.
Brilliant. Okay, good. So super delighted to be here. And everything I'm going to talk about today is are things that worked for me, that worked for when I was changing my relationship with alcohol, and things that I work with today with people whom I help to achieve this too. So this isn't something that I just sort of put together for you. This is really an excerpt of the content that I use. And I will say it's part of what has really transformed my life, which is why I reached out to Mary and Christine, because I just want to share. I just want more people to be able to make the transformation that they want. So what we're going to cover today, 3 main areas. I'm going to talk about why we desire alcohol. It might not be what you think it is, how we perpetuate that desire, and how we then unlearn that desire, right? So those are the 3 things we're covering off today. First, a few quick words about me. I lived this experience. So today I help high achievers to reclaim their lives and get freedom around alcohol. But this, I struggled actually for years with this. So I saw myself as a very intelligent, very capable person. I had an extremely big job. I had hundreds of people reporting to me, had a lovely family life. I was used to setting goals and achieving them, but I just couldn't get my arms around what was happening with me and alcohol, right? And I wasn't, to many people, maybe I wasn't overly drinking, but it was just too much. And it was incredibly frustrating because I would try so many times to change, and just nothing would have an impact. So I know genuinely what it feels like to say yes to a drink when you're screaming that to say no. I know what it's like to feel that I can't stop. I know what it's like to feel that pull in the evening to drink, even though you had a cast iron commitment to yourself that morning that you weren't going to do it. But I just basically had enough of this, and the techniques I was using wasn't working. I was told to go to AA, and that clearly wasn't for me. So I figured this out and I got into coaching. And these days, how this looks for me is that I still go to bars. I go to restaurants all the time. I live with an open bottle of white wine in the fridge. And I smile at that because white wine was my thing, right? I was to drink white wine like water almost. And it just doesn't really have any impact on me. Now, these days, I prefer not to drink, but I don't say I'm sober. And I'm very aware I'm talking to a moderation management group here. And I kind of see what I do as the height of moderation. I reserve the right to drink at any time. Indeed, if somebody has something they say is super spectacular, I might have a sip or 2, I might even have a glass. But the fact is, I just don't care for it really these days. I don't think about it these days. And that for me is what I aim for when I help people, and for myself is freedom. It's freedom to decide. It's freedom to be around alcohol and drink if you want, to the amount you wish, or to not. So that's really what I want to talk about today. So this is for you, and I like to say a little bit at the beginning who it's for and it isn't. And I'm not into labels. And I said, I say things like, I don't call myself sober, I don't go in for that. I do need to make it clear here that this is for you if you know you're not an alcoholic. And by alcoholic, what I mean there is somebody, if you are not drinking to avoid withdrawal symptoms. And Mary shared that really tragic piece in the Facebook community the other day about the dangers of if you're going cold turkey and not quitting, under medical supervision. So I do want to use the word alcoholic with care, but this is for you people. This is for you if you know you're not in that situation. Although you can learn from this. It's just please don't stop drinking without medical supervision. This is for you if you don't want to declare yourself powerless to alcohol. That was me. I was, really a together person. I knew that I wasn't powerless. I just didn't understand what was going on. This is for you if you do struggle to drink less, but you're willing to feel the discomfort You're willing to take responsibility for your results. That's a big one, right? It's down to you. It's not down to anything that's happening around you. If you take responsibility, you can get the results. And be willing to fail and be willing to learn from that failure. And basically you're all in and committed. And if you have those elements, it's possible for you to transform and to moderate and to have the relationship with alcohol that you wish for. This isn't for you if you're looking for a quick fix, right? What I offer is not just some magic pill or some magic mantra that if you repeat this, it's all going to be good. It's not for you if you're unwilling to put in the work. And like I said just now, if you're unwilling to take responsibility for your results, that's a big one. Just sort of, it's down, I would say it's down to me. This is down to you. Or if you're not an action taker, and I talked about alcoholism just now. All right, so that's that. And really, this works if you certainly want to quit drinking. And I know there are people in them who start in moderation community and they say, well, actually, maybe I want to go all the way and quit, maybe not. This works if you just want to cut back, whether that means you just want to, a drink every Friday or at celebrations, you just want to drink a little bit less in each sitting, however that looks for you. Or maybe, as so many people I talk with and meet who just don't know, they're not sure what outcome they want. But what they do know is that their drinking today isn't serving them in some way. They are not getting the results they want. So they know something needs to change, right? So that's what I'm addressing here. So I want to start by saying that one of the issues I see, especially with a lot of the shame around drinking, is that we are socialized to believe there are two types of drinker. We have the alcoholics who just can't hold their liquor. And then we have everybody else who drinks normally, right? And if you're in the middle, if you're one of the millions of people in the middle, no wonder you feel a little bit confused. And that was certainly where I was, because I knew that I didn't have a physical dependency, but I knew that what was happening to me wasn't what I perceived to be normal and wasn't what I wanted to be normal. And how this tends to show up for a lot of the people I talk with is things like perhaps you drink quicker than your friends. Perhaps you find it hard to stop. You have maybe, and it might only be 3. You might only have 3, you might want to have 1, you might end up ending 3. And I'm not talking here about blackouts and so on. I'm not to that extreme necessarily. You might feel conflicted about your drinking. You just, something's off, but you're not entirely sure what it is. Or perhaps you just feel so overwhelmed. And again, when I initially started to think something's got to change here, and I would Google, am I an alcoholic and AA, and it just, none of it resonated with me. And that felt very confusing because I felt I was being channeled down this path that just wasn't what I was looking for. But what I want to talk about today is what's going on, why we act the way we do and why we have this desire. And I hope that when you see this, you can see, yeah, it all makes sense. And then for me, that was the light bulb moment when I could understand that it all made sense. Of course, what was happening was happening. I was unable to change it, right? I wasn't in the dark. So first, I always like to start with asking the question, why do you drink, right? I start working with people or I meet people, why do we drink? I hear all sorts of responses to this, and you might want to be thinking yourself right now, why do you drink? I hear things like, well, everyone in my family drinks, or I just always have, or, I'm called boring if I don't drink, or, well, if, the bar has happy hour and that's what we always just do. They always pull me my favorite cocktail when I go in, or, I see, this used to spark me. I see something on the TV, them drinking, and I want to drink. So we have all these reasons as to why we drink. But really the reason that we all do this is because we want to. We have a desire for the alcohol. And that sounds so basic and so simple. But as you see, we often color this with all these other reasons, all these circumstances and people. But when it comes down to it, it's because we desire it. And it's all down to when we feel desire, we have the neurotransmitter dopamine that's released into our brain when we're doing enjoyable activities. And that sounds really it gets a little bit, so I'm not a scientist, but I like to think of this is that dopamine plays a role in how we feel pleasure. I can understand that. We have this dopamine reaction thing, and that's to do with how we feel pleasure. And as humans, we like to feel pleasure, and we feel pleasure with all sorts of things, like seeing a beautiful spring flower or feeling the sun on your face, as I did today. You know, it's not very sunny here normally, but it felt really lovely. Perhaps holding the hand of somebody you love. We get dopamine responses to this. We like this. This makes us feel good. And this is all very natural. But if I were to consider for myself the idea of eating an orange or eating a chocolate biscuit, immediately, just with that thought, I want to eat the chocolate biscuit. And that's because in the chocolate biscuit, there's sugar, which is highly concentrated, and it's going to give me a spectacular dopamine boost, far more than the orange would, far more pleasure. It's just because of, you know, how it's been concentrated with the sugar. Alcohol does the same thing, right? So while we might feel pleasure of drinking a lovely glass of water after a run, we're going to feel even more pleasure with a glass of wine, because it's been concentrated and fermented and everything. So it's because it's all about pleasure. So that's why we desire, why we drink. That's because of that desire and because of how the alcohol is constructed. We have the same thing with foods, as I say, but alcohol was particularly intense. And we go around and we tend to think that this desire is innate. It's just what we do, right? Yeah, everybody drinks. And yeah, I know lots of people who love to drink, and that's why I desire it. And it's kind of, it can seem as though it's outside of our control, because it seems so involuntary. Even when we say, I just don't want to drink, I'm not going to drink tonight, we then end up drinking, and we say, where on earth did that come from? Well, the fact is, this behavior is learned. Our desire for alcohol is learned. And I like to look at it like that with myself. I taught myself to like wine. In fact, I taught myself to love French Chablis, right? It was just a pattern I did. I taught myself by repeating the act of drinking. And I taught myself so well, in fact, I was a really, really good learner, that I became an expert drinker of white wine. And this is all also to do with how the brain works. So not only is it that we have this dopamine response, so we're seeking the pleasure, but our brains like to be efficient, right? Because think about all of the things you do in life, from getting up in the morning to going to work and all these things. These are all processes that we do. We repeat. We like to be very efficient. And so what you've done with drinking is you've just made it an efficient thing that you do. I like to say things like, so imagine when you get up in the morning, like most people, you probably clean your teeth, and you probably clean your teeth before you go to bed at the end of the day. You don't have to think at all about how to hold the toothbrush, how to put on the toothpaste. You probably don't have to schedule it in your calendar. It just happens, because this is a habit you've repeated for years and years and years. And so the brain knows that, okay, Anna's got up, she had her breakfast. Now we're going to run the cleaning the teeth pattern. Similar thing with driving, right? So if you drivers out there, you will drive without thinking. But if you can remember back to your early days of driving, it all felt like there was so much going on at the same time. I could concentrate on all these things. And it's just become more automatic, and it can become so automatic that you can run these programs, or even with driving, behind this machine without even realizing it. I remember years ago, I worked for a company, and I would drive to the office, and the company moved location. And then one day, a couple of weeks later, I ended up driving to the old office, right, to the old building. And it was like, my goodness, I can't remember getting here. And I don't know why I'm running this, why I'm at the old place. We're clearly at the new place. It was because I got in the car and my brain said, okay, we're now going to run the Anna driving to the office routine. We do this with washing hands. We do this all over. And we do this with drinking, right? So what I'm doing here is just normalizing the reason why we act the way we do. But with drinking, we don't just repeat the act of drinking so that we become efficient at it and we get very good at it. we repeat it at certain times with certain people in response to certain emotions. So we teach our brains that we not only to want to run, the drinking routine, but we teach ourselves to expect it as well. So we anticipate we're going to want to drink when we go there, right? Because we get so used to doing this. This is how habits are formed. And this is why it can feel so scary, because I speak to so many people and say, I haven't got a clue what was going on. It was kind of like I was just not in control. I was drinking before I even knew what was going on. And it's not that. It's just that you've learned the desire for it and you've practiced the pattern so often that you can do it without much conscious thought. Simple. It's as simple as that. And we know this already, actually, if we think about this, because not many people drink at breakfast. I know I certainly never did, right? Perhaps you might want a glass of champagne for a special treat if you're going out for a brunch on a Sunday. But most people, if you were, if I was to crack open the Chablis on a Tuesday morning with my pancakes or my full English, it would kind of be a bit weird, right? Most people think that's a little bit strange. And it's simply because we haven't taught ourselves to drink at breakfast. It's not something that we deem acceptable, and it's not something that we have practiced. So the point here is that these cravings don't just appear. They are there because we have taught ourselves to drink in response to them. And so then that beds them in, and then we predict them and we look ahead and we anticipate, and then we continue with this act of drinking. But with all of that said, when we understand with all of that, that explains why we drink, it still doesn't really understand. So what's behind it, right? So I get that we drink because we desire it. I get because I've taught myself to desire it, and I get because I've taught myself to do that in certain cases to respond to emotions and people and so on. But why? And it's tied to the desire to feel good. As humans, we like to feel good. We like to feel pleasure. And if you think about how alcohol really is a part of so much of our lives today in so many ways, I've written a great long list here of all the reasons we might drink, to have fun, to relax, as a reward, as a treat, to let your hair down, to make an experience feel better, to feel confident, to avoid having to explain why you're not drinking, to avoid being labeled as boring. All of these things, the common denominator is we want to feel good. And this is why it gets so tricky, I think, when people decide, I want to make a change here. I want to transform my life around alcohol, because we have been associating drinking with feeling good, right? And so when you try to change the habit, you're in this dilemma, because if drinking is what you did to feel good and you're not going to drink anymore, well, you still want to feel good. So what then? So how do you achieve that? And this is why so many people, and I was definitely in this boat, are fearful of moderating, are fearful of cutting back, because we think, well, how are we going to feel good? Is life going to be really dreary? Is life going to be just one long depressing slog without this thing that we have got used to that makes us feel good? So, and because your desire to feel good isn't going to go away, you're going to want to feel good. So how do we get that if we are removing this thing that we've just got so used to using to feel good? Okay, so that's part of the conundrum, I think, that hits people when they decide they want to make this change. So if desire created the routine, I've explained that this is just a routine that we go through and we practice it and we get very, very good at it. The thing that perpetuates it is the reward. And this is that dopamine response. And this is where alcohol is just so powerful, right? Because it gives us such a dopamine hit. It feels just so very intense. And this is by design. The alcohol producers want us to have that effect. And that becomes part of the reward. So you can see here that you start to create this little desire reward loop. The desire plus reward creates the habit. And I actually often don't use the word habit, because I think there's some negative connotation here with habit and drinking. I like to think it's just a routine, or it's a program, or it's a pattern, right? It's just something that you run in your life, just like you run the cleaning your teeth routine. You run the having a drink at 6 o'clock routine. And like the sort of the significance of the reward is the piece that trips us up a lot, I think, because I like to think of it that I enjoy eating bananas. I really like bananas, and I can eat one banana. It's great. I can possibly have two. That's okay. I'd be pushed to eat three, or certainly wouldn't ever eat four. And yet I used to be able to drink not just one, but 2, 3, 4, 5 glasses of wine. And that's because to my brain, the reward of white wine was so much stronger than banana. It's going to want me to have that, because if something feels delicious and pleasurable, the brain thinks it's really important. It doesn't understand I don't need Chablis to survive, but it still is picking up on my response to this, on my desire, on the dopamine, and say, okay, Anna, you like this, we're going to give you more of this. And we're going to find every way to give you more of this. And tell you what, we're going to then be really super efficient at it. So you can find yourself in this position. And again, it just feels like it's happening to you, and you can feel out of control, but it's not. It all makes sense when you see what's happening here. So what happens is, you think, I want to drink. That thought creates desire. And then you close that desire loop by drinking. You think, yum, this is important, great dopamine response. Because we don't think great dopamine response. We just think, yeah, I feel so buzzed, I feel great, I feel confident, I feel whatever. I want more of that. So then that creates the feeling of more desire. And then we drink again. And that's how we continue this loop. As I've been saying all this, and hopefully it's all making sense as to why we're seeking this reward, I also want to pause and be clear about what I haven't said. I haven't said that any of this happens because you lack willpower, or because you are broken, or because your family drank, or you're hopeless, or you're ridiculous, or you're weak. I haven't said any of that, because none of that is true, right? This is something that's happening. You've taught yourself to do this. If you're a good drinker, if you drink too much, the way I like to think of it was I have a really well-functioning brain. It's a great learner. So now I can harness that to learn something different, to unlearn this habit, this pattern, this routine that I no longer want, because we have unlimited capacity to learn new things. I was actually just on a session the other day to do with memory and how we learn. So that's the key thing here. You can uncreate this desire. And I'm fairly sure that the word uncreate doesn't exist, but I kind of use it on purpose because I want to make it clear that there's something that we've created and we can just uncreate that if we choose to. The other way I found very helpful to look at this is the way we do this is it's a skill set that we are learning, right? So if you're sitting there saying, yeah, but I've tried and I just can't do it. And that was me for the longest time. I've tried all these things. It was reassuring, and I find it's reassuring for many of my clients that we think it's just a skill set we have to learn. When I say to people, so how would you learn to fly a plane if they're not a pilot? They say, well, I suppose I have to go to flight school and I'd have to learn aerodynamics. I'd have to learn what all the knobs do. And I'd have to learn about fuel and the radio. And I'd have to have an instructor. We understand that there's all these steps that we have to go through to learn something. But when it comes to things like learning how to stop over drinking or even stop overeating or any of these sort of life skills, we kind of expect that we should just know. And I think that creates a really big weight and it demands perfectionism of us. And that means when we fail, we beat ourselves up because we feel inadequate. So if that's you, just think of this as it's simply a skill set. You just don't have that skill set right now. There's nothing to stop you from getting that skill set. And I would offer as well, you come to the moderation management calls, you're on the Facebook group, you've come to this session, so you're clearly willing to put in the work, which puts you head and shoulders above many people who might sit and grumble about this but not be willing to do the work. So it shows that you have a brain that's active and wants to make this change. When I say skill set, this can be in this area, it's a number of things, right? So there's a skill, I believe, in managing cravings to drink when they come. Different ways of handling this is a way to learn how to do that. There's a skill in learning how to be around other people who might be, jibbing you and jiving you and saying, come on, have a drink, go on, drinks pushers, how you deal with those people. There's certainly a skill in learning to sit with emotions that feel uncomfortable, learning to be able to be anxious, learning to be bored and not drink in response to that. Right, so there's a number of layered skills in here, but this is all doable. This is all totally doable. And for anyone out there who might be thinking, no, you can't control desire. I just have this desire for it. I want to offer that you actually know that what I'm saying you will have seen in your life. So I've got these lovely ice cream cones on the screen here because I cannot stand ice cream. I don't eat the stuff. I don't like sorbet. I've tried it millions of times. Lemon meringue ice cream is the nicest I got to eating it, and just doesn't do anything for me, right? You just don't have to have any effort to not eat it. Yeah, I know lots of people, you hear of lots of people who struggle with weight loss because they can't give up having a tub of ice cream, right, at night. But for me, it's totally irrelevant. And in the drinking world, tequila would be the thing, right? Back in the day, I'd never have drunk tequila. If I went in a bar and all they had was tequila, I just wouldn't want it. So I want you to think of something right now that you don't care for, that maybe is, and preferably something that other people will say, go on, yeah, we love it, like chocolate, or say ice cream, or chocolate chip cookies, or whatever it is. Think of that thing. And then if I were to offer you, put in a table in front of you, a pile of that thing, right? Someone would put a pile of ice cream in front of me, it would do nothing for me. If I said you could have a lifetime supply of whatever it is, chocolate in front of you, to put yourself into that position and no, it just doesn't mean anything because it's not part of who you are. It's irrelevant. And I think that's the position. When we can get to that position with alcohol, then we're on the right track, because you're not having to hold yourself back, right? From it, it's just not part of who you are. And this applies in moderating as well. So this applies if you want to lose desire entirely, or if you just want to keep alcohol in its place. I think of this as, let's say you're going to a party. If I was going to a party and I could choose to wear a really sparkly party dress, or I could have an equally good time at the party if I wore jeans and a t-shirt, right? I'm wearing a sparkly dress or jeans and a t-shirt. It's my choice to wear the sparkly dress. I could choose at the party to have a glass of wine. It's almost like an accessory, but it's not the sole reason for being there. I'm not getting the enjoyment solely from that liquid, from that thing. I'm getting the enjoyment from the connection, from being with the people, and all of those things. And when we can get to that point, when we can reduce our desire and manage our desire so that it really doesn't become anything we have to hold ourselves back from, that's when we're on a winner, when it comes to changing our relationship with alcohol. Because what happens is that we reinforce habits by paying attention to them, and they lapse when we don't pay attention to them. Think of a road. If you're driving along a road, a super highway where it's all completely clean and painted and it's easy to drive. You don't have to think about it. Whereas if you're driving down a country lane, like where I grew up, and there's lots of potholes and lots of grass everywhere, and it's much harder work. If we can get our drinking habits so we're not paying attention to it, so we have to really think about it, then it becomes far, far, far less automatic, and that's how we unwind it. There's the often talked about, you probably heard it, the Pavlov dogs experiment, where they rang the bell, walked down the hall, delivered the dogs food. And what happened was, over time, the dogs would salivate upon hearing the sounds, right? Hearing the bell, hearing the shoes. What's often talked about less, it was not talked about so often, is that they unwired this, right? So they rang the bell, they walked down the hall to the dogs, but they didn't feed them. And what happened over time was, because they were triggering the desire, right? They were ringing the bell, they were walking down the hall, but because they weren't closing that desire reward loop with food, the dogs stopped having a physical reaction. And this, I like to think of this because this is dogs, right? They're probably not sitting there feeling very triggered or worrying and being, really super anxious. But even then, without any conscious thought, their physical reaction changed. And so this comes down to, we need to, I believe firmly that we need to keep, the triggers there. We need to not remove that. We need to learn how to go towards the triggers, but just not reward ourselves with the alcohol, not close that loop, that desire reward loop. We interrupt it. Okay. And as part of this, sort of a mini segue here, I really encourage everybody here today to pay close attention to the words you use. In fact, I would have this as like a homework exercise. I'd have you grab a sheet of paper and write down all these things that we say to ourselves, right? We say things, I love wine. I used to say that, I love wine. I love Chablis. I love Premier Cru. I mean, I just love it. There was this one particular brand. I just loved it. That wine is speaking to me. We say things like this, right? I can't wait till I get off work. I have that first glass. I'm so stressed. I know that the wine is going to help me. And I would posit that anybody who's thinking these things is going to be feeling desire. This is creating the desire, right? This is keeping us in the desire. And we kind of run these words. We don't think about it because they're just often, they could be fleeting thoughts in our head. But be really, really, really careful of this, because this is only going to be fueling that feeling of desire that leads to us wanting to have the reward of alcohol and close the loop. So instead of sitting there thinking just, well, I've got to stop drinking. This is where I was. I've got to stop drinking. I don't want to do that. And I'm really worried. This is going to be really dreary. I'm going to spend my whole life saying no. And I really just didn't want that. I really didn't want to be saying no. I started to ask, what did I really want? Right. So I was saying yes to a drink, but actually that was just a cover for what I really wanted. For me, it was often I would drink when I was bored. These days, I quite enjoy boredom, but I was drinking when I was bored. And so I would say, so what am I looking for? I'm actually looking for a bit of entertainment. I'm looking to feel, excited and just a bit sparkly, right? Perhaps you drink because you want to feel confident, right? So confidence is the thing you're seeking. It isn't the drink. The drink is just sort of the gateway to get you there quicker, but you're looking for the confidence. Or we think, I want to feel more accepted. If I join in, I'm going to feel more accepted. So what you're looking for is acceptance and connection. And to start to consider other ways that you can get what you really want, right? So if you want to feel a bit more confident, how can you start to set up connections with people so that people aren't all newcomers to you every time you go to an event, for instance? Start to look at really what you want, rather than just allowing this layer of alcohol to be the easy fix there. And it's kind of life-changing when you start to look at what you're going towards rather than what you can't have, right? So you're not saying no all the time, you're actually saying yes, and you're saying yes to yourself and what you really, really, really want. So you're going towards that. So pretty much coming to the end of what I wanted to say here. And actually, if there's one thing you take away from today, it's this slide, right? I want, that my brain So you could say my brain created my desire for alcohol, and it can uncreate it too, right? This just saying this puts the responsibility, I felt, put the responsibility into me. All right, I understood what I've said today. I understood how I had reached the point where I was. I had understood that I had taught myself to drink. I understood that I had just practiced it and just become really skilled at it. That what I needed to do was to be able to break that loop and become skilled at doing other things. What was I going towards, rather than, you know, putting up with the life I had and having alcohol be the thing that was giving me what I want? What did I really, really desire above all else? And this all came down to understanding that that's how we're wired. And if you understand that's how we're wired, that sort of just makes it more accessible. I think there's not this magic thing that you have to learn. You just sort of work the numbers, work with understanding why we have built this system, and that of course we're going to want that reward of alcohol. So how can we create a situation where we're not creating our own desire for it? And it all starts really with saying it's possible. It's possible to do this. It's possible for me to learn new skills. It's possible for me to be able to say no to people. It's possible for me to change how I react and respond to cravings, right? It's because, and it's nothing to do with me as a person, and it's everything to do with my capacity to learn and to change. And of course I can do this. Let me see. Yeah, it can be, there's lots of trial and error involved as well, I will say that. And if you're looking at this thinking it seems so far away, it wasn't straightforward. But again, by just understanding the mechanics, it kind of, to me, it felt, you know, like that, there's that fairy tale of, I think it's Hansel and Gretel, where they leave the pebbles so they can see the way through the forest. This will help you to get to where you want to be. And that was it, Mary. I hope that was
Great.
what you wanted.
I think it was fantastic. And I think, you know, I understand what you're saying because of how we talk to ourselves. And it's always funny to me that I hear how many people come to MM and join and say, I'm not powerless over alcohol. And then like their next statement is, but I don't have a stop button. And
Yeah.
it can't be both. So I think that's always something that I need to impress. Well, if you're going to have power, you've got to learn that you do have a stop button, but you have to make choices. But I'm going to open up to everybody else.
I'm going to stop the share here, yeah, so that we can then.
Yes.
Oops.
Okay. All right. So does anybody else have any questions?
Do you want me to stop
the
the
recording?
recording?
I think it might. Let's stop the recording and we'll open it up to everybody.
Start recording. Here we go.